thank you very much, Katsunori, for inviting me to participate in this colloquium and organizing this online talk. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we do
yes,
hear
okay.
well. And
okay,
there
super.
are like 50 people in the room right now, but maybe you can see it on the video camera.
I can see you. I admit that I regret not being able to be with you today, but it's already good to communicate online. And I hope you will understand my French accent. I will speak slowly. And as Katsunori said, my presentation will last around 45 minutes, maybe a little more. Please keep your questions for afterwards. We'll have plenty of time to talk. So, as you know, my presentation will be devoted to micro-phenomenology, a concrete phenomenological method enabling us to become aware of unrecognized dimensions of our lived experience and describe them with precision. In the first part of my presentation, I will describe the method. And in the second part, I will describe some of these unrecognized dimensions. But first, I would like to say a few words about the origin of micro-phenomenology. The method was born from the idea advocated by the biologist Francisco Varela in the context of his neurophenomenological research program, that to understand the functioning of the mind, science cannot rely only on the study of cerebral activity, but has to create a rigorous discipline to study human experience. This was a groundbreaking idea at the time, at least, because until then, science had been based on the exclusion of lived experience. To study emotion, for example, scientific psychology tried to rely only on objective measures, like changes in body temperature, heartbeat, or brain activity. The idea behind neurophenomenology is that it is impossible to understand emotion or any type of experience, and even to interpret objective measures without asking the subjects what they are experiencing. However, describing experience raises the question of the investigation method and of the reliability of its results. Introspection has been accused of distorting, reifying, or disrupting experience. Introspective reports have been accused of being non-reproducible and therefore non-verifiable because of the singular nature of experience. Reproducibility being the foundation of any scientific validation, the singular nature of experience would prevent introspection from achieving the status of a science, in this view. The scientific article which has contributed the most to discredit spontaneous descriptions of experience is an article by Nisbet and Wilson, published in 1977. In this paper, the most cited in cognitive science, almost 18,000 citations today, the two researchers draw from a series of experimental studies the conclusion that we have no introspective access to our cognitive processes. A Swedish team of cognitive scientists recently tried to challenge these conclusions through the following experiment. The experimenter shows the participants two pictures of human faces and asks them to choose which one they find the most attractive. Immediately after, he shows the selected picture again and asks participants to explain the reasons for their choice. But in some cases, the picture which is represented is the one that was not chosen. And surprisingly, the participants detect the trick in only 20% of cases, and in 80% of cases provide an explanation for the choice they did not make. This result seems to confirm that we have no introspective access to our choice processes, and by extension, to all our cognitive processes. With a little team of micro-phenomenologists, we decided to reproduce this experiment, but introduced for some choices between the moment of the choice and the moment the subject is shown the wrong picture, a micro-phenomenological interview where they are helped to describe their choice process through neutral and precise questions by a skilled interviewer. Here are our results. The colored part corresponds to the rate of detection of the manipulation. In the trials where subjects did not undergo the interview, our results are very similar to those of Johansson. However, in the trials where subjects were assisted in the description of their choice, they detected the trick in 80% of cases. A second important result is that unguided participants, even when they are not fooled, only provide scanty descriptions, such as, "I chose this one because she has a nice smile." They remain focused on the what of their choice, that is, the chosen or unchosen face, while guided participants provide very detailed descriptions of how they chose, of their choice processes. For example, the chronology of exploration of the features of the faces, or fleeting inner images which were evoked by the pictures, or subtle inner feelings which were used as choice criteria. 3,000 words versus only 200 words for the unguided reports. These results confirm that naive descriptions of our cognitive processes are usually poor and unreliable. But they show that guided participants do something special, perform specific acts, which enable them to access their inner experience and therefore detect the manipulation. What do they do? I would like to give you a taste of these acts by getting you to live a little experience. If you agree, take your time, here and now, to imagine a natural landscape that you like. To imagine a natural landscape that you like. I invite you to do this experience, to live it, please. You can close your eyes if you wish, and please raise your hand or virtual hand when you have got this landscape. Thank you. So now I invite you to answer silently the following questions. Which landscape was it? Was it an imaginary landscape or a landscape that you had seen before? To which part of the world does it belong? When you saw this landscape, what did you see? What were the elements of this landscape? Were there any colors in this landscape? Which colors? How was the light of this scene? Was the visual scene accompanied by any sounds, by any smells, by any tactile sensations? Now, what was your point of view on this landscape? Did you see it as if it was a photograph or a film? Or were you inside the landscape? For those of you who saw a photograph or a film, where did you see it? At the top, at the bottom, to the right, to the left? How far away was this image? How big was it? For those of you who were inside the landscape, were you seeing it out of your own eyes? Or were you seeing it from the eyes of another person in the scene? Or from elsewhere in the scene? Can you now make yourself attentive to what it's like to be in this landscape? How is its particular atmosphere? What does this landscape do to you? Do you feel anything, even very subtly? If so, what kind of feeling is this feeling? Is it located somewhere? Does it have an extension, a volume, a particular texture? Now I invite you to let the genesis of this experience come back. From the moment you heard me invite you to imagine a natural landscape, until the moment you raised your hand. Was the final landscape preceded by other candidate landscapes? Did the final landscape appear at once, complete, or was it progressively constituted? In the last case, which sensory dimension appeared first? The vision, the tactile, the auditory, the olfactory, or maybe the feeling of the landscape, or anything else? Finally, when precisely did you know that you were imagining a landscape and raised your hand? Now, I invite you to leave that landscape and come back here and now, where you are. And thank you for participating in this little exercise. But I have one last question to ask you. What did you do in order to answer my questions? What did you do? So I assume that the first thing you did was to call back or evoke your experience of imagining this landscape. Evoking a past experience is a very specific process, which has been little studied until now. It falls within a type of memory, which the phenomenologist Husserl called passive memory. Indeed, we are always in the process of memorizing what we live, but most of the time involuntarily, without being aware of memorizing. For example, may I ask you, what was your first thought when you woke up this morning? I suppose that you did not voluntarily memorize this first thought, but you may be able to recall this experience and make this information reappear. In the same way, in order to answer my questions about your imaginary landscape, you were able to reenact your experience of imagining this landscape. Therefore, in the context of a micro-phenomenological interview, the interviewer uses specific techniques to help the interviewee evoke or presentify the past experience to be explored, until it becomes more present for her than the interview situation is. With micro-phenomenology, we can explore past experience which have lived a long time ago, or a few days ago, or a few hours ago. We call them invoked experiences. We can also explore experiences that are provoked just before the interview. But in both cases, these experiences are past. We have to evoke them, even if the experience took place just before the interview. And in both cases, a set of objective verbal, paraverbal, and non-verbal clues allow the interviewer to verify that the interviewee is evoking the situation. The verbal clues are, for instance, the use of the present tense. An example of a non-verbal clue is the defocusing of the gaze, the fact that the interviewee stops eye contact with the interviewer to look off into space. At the same time, the flow of speech slows down and is accompanied or sometimes even replaced by co-verbal gestures. Then, through my questions, in the little exercise I proposed, I tried to help you perform another inner act, loosening your absorption into the content or what of your experience, to become aware of how it appeared to you. I started by asking questions on the content of the final landscape, on its objective elements. And then I progressively tried to draw your attention towards something more evanescent, more intimate, somehow closer to you, your experience of that landscape. For example, the point of view you adopted on the imaginary scene, your feeling of this place, and finally, the genesis of this experience of imagining a landscape. From the moment I invite you to imagine a natural landscape until the moment you raised your hand. So, in fact, in every activity, whether it is imagining, making a choice, reading an article, or listening to a piece of music, the absorption into the content or object of experience, the what, creates a narrow attentional tunnel which conceals the experience itself, the how. We are a little like blind persons exploring objects with the tip of the cane, whose attention is entirely directed toward the object, and who ignore the contact and variation of pressure of the cane in the palm of their hand. To use the well-known example of Merleau-Ponty. Like blind person, we use this information in action, but usually it remains largely unrecognized, unnoticed, transparent in a way. For example, while writing a paper, I am completely absorbed in the content of the ideas I am trying to express. But I'm hardly aware of the contact of my fingers on the pen or the computer keys, of the tensions in my back, of the rapid succession of inner images, slight emotions, and felt meanings, rapid evaluations and comparisons which accompany my activity of writing. even as fundamental and pervasive experiences as our bodily and sensory experiences largely escape us. For example, when I make a movement, my interest in the object toward which the movement is directed masks the movement of the limb, as well as the internal sensations of movement in the muscles and joints that initiate the movement of my limb. When a sound occurs, my attention instantaneously focuses on the physical object at the origin of the sound. In a fraction of a second, I recognize the sound as the song of a blackbird on the plum tree, for example, leaving myself, forgetting in a way my immediate felt experience of this song. All our experiences are concerned, from the most concrete to the most abstract. Our attention towards the object of experience, the what, masks the experience itself, the how. However, we can loosen our focus on the what in order to let the how appear. Performing these acts is a skill which can be learned. For example, through meditation techniques. These acts, evoking and releasing our absorption into the what, these acts may also be triggered through relevant prompts and questions in the context of an interview, such as a micro-phenomenological interview. Let me add that unlike the collective interview that I've just proposed, a micro-phenomenological interview is not made up of predetermined questions. It has nothing to do with a questionnaire. On the contrary, each question is based on the previous answer. To give you an idea, here is a short excerpt of interview. I invite you, if you agree, to go back to the moment when I asked you. I would like you to spell the word elephant. What happened then? At that moment, the thought I had in my head vanished. How did it vanish? Was it instantaneous or gradual? Oh, it was very quick, but it nevertheless took a moment. And what happened during this moment? I loosened my attention on that thought. And when you loosen your attention on that thought, what do you loosen? In fact, I loosen a light tension in my head. And when you loosen it, how do you go about it? What do you do? Etc. So as you can notice, the questions of the interviewer are content-free. They are limited to drawing the subject's attention to the various moments of the experience without suggesting any content. For example, what happened first?
Excuse me?
There is a problem?
Is the mic? Yeah,
Yes.
the room's power suddenly got down. Can you pause for try to put the power back? It's back.
Yes.
Yeah, the projector here. It's on. Yeah, one needs to be. Yeah. We're going to reboot the projector, so we must have been sorry about this.
Claire, so we're back on again. So
Okay.
sorry for the interruption. Please, maybe yeah. Can you start from where you stopped, or just before
Yes.
where you stopped?
Yes, I will try. So, can you hear me well again?
Yes, we're
Yeah,
back.
okay, super. So I was commenting this little excerpt of an interview by noticing that the questions, for example, the questions in red, what happened then and what happened during this moment, are very simple and non-inducive. They don't suggest anything. They are limited to drawing the interviewee's attention towards the various moments of the experience. Another key question in red that consists in questioning the verbs of action used by the interviewee. For example, when she says, I loosen attention, I loosen my attention on that thought. The interviewer asks, when you loosen this tension, what do you do? You can notice that this question is at the same time very precise, very focused, and non-inductive, because completely empty of suggested content. It helps the interviewee stabilize her attention on a subtle inner micro-gesture, losing attention on a thought, and provide a precise description, but without infiltrating any presuppositions. The question at the bottom, how do you know that your attention is now loosened, draws the interviewee's attention towards very implicit criteria of accurate realization of this micro-gesture. In this process, the slowing down of the verbal flow, the presence of hesitations and silences, co-verbal gestures, the use of action verbs in the present tense are clues that the subject is not reciting ready-made knowledge, but is discovering previously unrecognized processes. Micro-phenomenological interviews have an iterative structure that I won't comment in detail, but it's just to give you an idea. And this iterative structure consists in helping the subjects to evoke the experience to be described several times, while guiding their attention towards a diachronic match which is finer each time. So the resulting descriptions are very fine-grained. To give you an idea, the average length of an interview is 1 hour for describing only a few seconds of experience. The micro-phenomenological interview method is an adaptation of the entretien d'explicitation created by the French psychologist Pierre Vermersch, an adaptation to research. So the method was initially developed to help persons engaged in professional practices to become aware of the implicit part of their actions in order to be able to transfer their expertise. The very first studies concerned the memorization of musical scores and the expertise of nuclear power plant supervisors. On the instigation of Francisco Varela, this interview method was adapted to the domain of cognitive sciences to describe any lived experience. It has been complemented on the one hand by a method for analyzing verbal reports and detecting regularities in the form of generic structures. On the other hand, by methods for assessing these results. Micro-phenomenology has been used to study lived experience in many domains. I will just cite a few of them. The experience of learning mathematics, the experience of listening to music, the experience of selecting a fabric in clothing design, the experience of synesthesia, of the rubber hand illusion, the experience of surprise, the experience of risky decision-making in managers, the experience of pain, the experience of epileptic seizures, psychedelic experiences, the experience of spiritual love, the experience of architectural spaces, the experience of meeting a tree in the forest, without forgetting the experience of lucid dreaming and objectless sleep experiences, which has been studied respectively by Emma Demsar and Adriana Alcaraz Sanchez, who just presented their result to you. So micro-phonological interviews have also been used to provide very fine-grained descriptions of meditative experiences and seem to be very useful for meditation practitioners as well as for meditation teachers. Finally, micro-phonological interviews are used to identify the experiential correlates of neural activity in so-called neurophenomenological projects. Interestingly, each time we used the method to analyze a corpus of microphonological descriptions, we had the surprise to discover generic patterns. I'm now talking, of the microphonological analysis. So, in other words, beyond the infinitely varying objects or contents of singular experiences, the analysis method makes it possible to identify generic characteristics which constitutes the structure of the experience under study. For example, my own thesis under the supervision of Francisco Varela, it was a long time ago. It was about the experience which accompanies the emergence of an intuition. And I had the surprise to discover that beyond the various contents of the intuitions that had been described to me, from scientific ideas to therapeutic or artistic insights, these experiences shared a common generic dynamic structure under the form of a definite succession of phases and subphases. Microphonological analysis consists in identifying, on the one hand, the diachronic structure of the experience under study. That is to say, its unfolding in time as a succession of moments that are roughly represented here by rectangles. On the other hand, the synchronic structure of a given moment of experience corresponds to the characteristics of the experience at this particular moment of time. For example, the sensory modalities that are lived at this particular moment, the emotional tone characterizing this moment. We could compare the diachronic dimension to a movie, while the synchronic dimension corresponds to a freeze frame. To give you an idea of how a synchronic structure is represented, here is a sketch of synchronic structure of a bodily feeling, characterized by its location and its density. It's just a fictive example. So the arrows corresponds to the three types of operations that enable the analyst to abstract, literally to pull out from minimal statements that we call descriptem, more and more generic, abstract descriptive categories. So to conclude this presentation of the micro-phenomenological method, I would like to notice that the emergence of a generic structure from a corpus of descriptions provided by different subjects, especially when the experience under study has been little explored, and there are no pre-established categories to describe it. So the emergence of a generic structure in that case is a strong intersubjective clue of reliability of these descriptions. Moreover, the detection of such structures has an important epistemological consequence. Indeed, once detected by a research team, a generic structure constitutes a hypothesis, likely to be validated or invalidated by the work of other teams. Experiential structures are thus results which are reproducible and therefore verifiable and falsifiable, which is the kingpin of any scientific validation, as we noticed earlier. Now, what type of experiential structures does micro-phenomenology enable us to discover? Releasing our usual absorption into the content of experience enables us to become aware of the usually invisible microgenesis of this content, such as the microgenesis of the choice of faces that I presented here earlier, the microgenesis of an inner image that we began to explore together, but also the microgenesis of an illusion, such as the rubber hand illusion, the microgenesis of an episode of mind wandering, of an episode of pain, or the microgenesis of an episode of lucid dreaming. Amazingly, these microgenesis seem to unfold in a dimension of experience which is characterized by the softening or even vanishing of the structures that we usually consider as the most solid and the most essential to experience. The separations we think we live between body and mind, between inner and outer space, and between sensory modalities. I will explore this, each one in turn. So, the softening of the separation usually perceived between body and mind is well illustrated by the experience of ideation. How does an idea come to us? Although the emergence of an idea is luckily a very common experience, we know little about it. Indeed, when an idea appears, all the interest usually focuses on its content and the exploration of its consequences. Very little attention is paid to the experience of its emergence, to the process which made its emergence possible. The reduction of the idea to its content expressed in verbal form, and the lack of awareness of its genesis has the effect of reducing our understanding of ideation to a disembodied cognitive mechanism. We represent our ideas as thought processes taking place in a mind, localized in the head and separated from the body. The collection of meticulous descriptions of the process of emergence of ideas paints a very different picture. This exploration shows that in the experience of ideation, the distinction that we believe we perceive between our mind and our lived body dissolves. According to many testimonies, before an idea is expressed in verbal, mathematical, pictorial, or musical form, it appears in the form of a direction, a movement, a rhythm, not pertaining to any particular sensory modality, but nevertheless subtly felt. For instance, Einstein described the emergence of his main idea as follows. For all these years, there was a feeling of direction, of heading straight for something concrete. It's of course very difficult to express this feeling in words, but I add it in a sort of overview and in a certain way visually. So this quote illustrates the fact that the space where an idea unfolds, even an apparently very abstract one, such as the theory of relativity, far from being purely conceptual and disembodied, takes the form of a landscape with a very specific texture, contrasts of densities and intensities, in which the rigid separation that we usually establish between body and mind vanishes. Even when the idea has been expressed, this gestural and quivering dimension remains. Beneath concepts, it seems to constitute the very dimension of meaning. It is anchoring in this felt dimension which makes a thought or spoken word embodied and alive. Co-verbal gestures which accompany any discourse are an open window on this dimension. Now, in this felt dimension, the frontier usually perceived between the sensory modalities also become more permeable. Indeed, the vocabulary used to describe the texture of these feelings often calls simultaneously on several sensory registers. For example, the feeling of direction that led Einstein to the theory of relativity seems to be both kinesthetic and visual. He talks of a feeling, and he said also, I had it in a sort of overview, in a certain way, visually. In a different domain, the psychoanalyst Theodor Reik describes the subtle inner sensations that guide him in the course of a therapeutic session, sometimes as visual, as nuances and fleeting psychic shadows, sometimes as auditory, as almost imperceptible half tones, sometimes as tactile, as little incoherencies, slight irregularities that were not visible but were perceptible to touch, as when a hand slides carefully and softly over a fabric, and sometimes as kinesthetic, as tiny subterranean variations. These feelings do not fall within a specific sensory modality. They are, strictly speaking, neither images nor kinesthetic or tactile sensations, nor sounds. However, they have specific, precise sensory submodalities, such as intensity, direction, rhythm, which have the interesting characteristic of being transmodal. Unlike, for example, temperature, which is specific to touch, or color, which is specific to sight, intensity, for example, is not specific to a particular sense, but can be transposed from one sense to another. So in this dimension of experience, the border usually perceived between the different sensory registers dissolves somehow. The felt dimension is also characterized by a certain permeability of the border, usually felt between inner and outer space. This characteristic is particularly well evidenced in perceptual processes when the tension towards the perceived object releases. For example, when a sound occurs, my attention usually focuses on the physical event and the origin of the sound, as I noticed earlier. In a fraction of a second, I recognize the sound as the song of a blackbird on the pine tree, coming in through my office window. This focused attention has an impact on the structure of my lived space. The object is out there, far from me who am here. This mode of attention, of listening, creates a distance, a separation between the perceived object and the perceiving subject. When a sound occurs, instead of going in search of the sound, listening out towards it, I can also make myself receptive to it, letting the sound come to me, letting myself be touched by it. Listening like this, a little as we listen to a piece of music, creates a sort of rhythmic attunement between bodily space and outer space, which has the effect of softening the limit between the two spaces. The felt song is not over there in the throat of the bird. It is not here in me either. It resonates in a space where the boundary between here and there vanishes. In visual perception too, loosening the tension towards the object has the effect of weakening the bodily boundaries. Suppose, for example, that during a walk in the countryside, a bend in the path reveals a new landscape. Immediately, I recognize its elements: birch trees, a stream, which I locate over there, at a distance from myself, whose point of view is located here at eye level. But there is another way of looking. Instead of recognizing objects over there, I can let colors, shapes, movements come to me. I can let the atmosphere, the particular rhythms that emanate from the landscape permeate me, a little like a perfume. In this experience, the landscape is no longer looked at but felt, and this feeling dissolves the boundary between it and me. A woman I interviewed told me how she suddenly discovered what it is to see this way. It was on a spring day, and she was watching the yellow flowers in her garden. Suddenly, she said, I felt what it is actually to see. To see isn't casting your gaze towards something, projecting it, but really it's letting the color, the landscape come to you. You're there and you receive it, and you have the impression that the color, the landscape imprints itself inside you. This sense of dissolution of bodily boundaries is often itself associated with the transformation of the feeling of individual identity, which becomes lighter and may even disappear. This weakening is very obvious in the emergence of a new idea. All the descriptions I collected mentioned the feeling of an absence of control. It happens to me, it's given to me, it escapes from me. This means that in this instance, the sense of agency, that is, the sense that I am the one who is generating the idea, is altered. The interviewed persons do not say, I have an idea, but an idea is coming to me. Even the sense of ownership, that is the feeling that this idea is my idea, fades. Interviewees don't even say, an idea is coming to me, but there is an idea. In sum, the more we come into contact with our experience, the more the structures that we usually consider as essential to it seem to vanish. We can summarize these findings like this. Micro-phenomenology aims at helping us become aware of our experience. Becoming aware of our experience requires releasing absorption into objects of experience. This releasing has the effect of weakening or softening the structures that usually characterize our experience. In other words, the very process of becoming aware has the effect of softening or subtilizing experience. It's a neologism, to subtilize. It would be even more accurate to say that they are one and the same process. The very process of becoming aware of experience is a process of subtilization of experience or softening of experience. Importantly, this softening process does not result from reorienting attention from a layer of solid and coarse phenomena towards a layer or more subtle or elusive phenomena, layers which would both be coexistent. But the very gesture of releasing the tension on the perceived phenomenon, a tension represented here by an arrow or arrows. So the circle outside is let's say it's the word, and the circle inside is the eye. So the very gesture of releasing the tension on objects softens their solidity, their density, makes them lighter, and in the same movement also softens its separation from a solid perceiving subject. Releasing the grasping on the object subtilizes at the same time the object and the subject poles. In other words, what micro-phonological investigations seem to highlight is that the structure of our lived space is not pre-given, but it's shaped by micro-acts. In this dynamic perspective, we don't have two poles, the subject pole and the object pole, but a spectrum of increasing or decreasing density of the subject-object couple. It's interesting to note that our vocabulary has no word to name this process, at least to my knowledge. So, as a conclusion, I would like to say a few words on the existential and societal impacts of this loss of contact with the felt dimension, what I call the felt dimension. So the creation and constant sustainment of two separate solid poles, and the fact that we are ordinarily cut off from their felt source not only causes suffering on an individual level, but has serious consequences on a societal level. This is notably the case in the educational field, where developing the capacity to invent new ideas, to think independently, would require acquaintance with the rhythmic dimension where ideas take their source and meaning, currently almost completely obscured. This is the case in architecture, which creates mostly cold, inhuman spaces, unsuitable for offering the contrasts of texture, density, depth, and luminosity, likely to awaken and rekindle the felt dimension in us. What to say about medicine, which focuses almost exclusively its investigations and care on the body, considered as a measurable object, ignoring the feeling, sensitive body. Importantly, this experiential starvation, to use an expression of Andy Fisher, who is an ecologist, eco-psychologist, this experiential starvation seems to be an essential condition for the survival of the current economic system, which strives to maintain it. So in this perspective, the development of methods to become aware of our experience and soften the process of separation and solidification, far from having only an epistemological interest, constitutes a major existential and societal issue. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for